What's up, guys? Tim also with DragBoss Garage. Welcome back to the channel for History in the Making. So welcome to DragBoss Live with our special guest, Don Losito. He's in the background warming up so he can make sure he can give us 2 hours of great history. So let's see who's here right now. We're looking at, we see Bill Ferrietti. What's up, Bill? Greg from Australia. Good to talk to you. Don Dotter, good to see you. The Shed says, unfortunately, I'll probably have to come back. That's okay, because he's got to get to work. But I want to give a big shout out to Mrs. DragBoss, the Bossettes. I appreciate you guys giving me the time that I can do these live chats. And Izzy and Elena, the Bossettes, thanks for the help you've been giving me out in the garage. You can see by watching Mrs. DragBoss's channel and my own channel, we're working on the Mustang. I posted some pictures of the intake manifold that I'm working on. Right now, I'm doing the adapter for the 4500 to 4150. Once I have that ported and shaped up, then I'm ready to take that 354 to the dyno and see what we can do with that. Mrs. DragBoss opened up the new oil pan for the Mustang. So now we can pull that engine out, put the new oil pan on it. Now the headers will fit. So we're moving right along on that. I want to give a big shout out to the guys that gave the Super Chat money last week. I appreciate that, guys. It goes right into the DragBoss fund. And maybe I can talk Don into taking some of the money, take his wife out to dinner. But thank you. I appreciate.
No, that's okay.
I appreciate you guys donating to DragBoss Garage. I really do. And Mike Lancy, thank you for hooking me up with these guys. Ed Case is here. Mrs. Katie, he's from Australia. Ramon Tubbs, good to see you. R-Dub Falco, good to see you. Ken Mole, it's good to see you too. So here's where we're at. Don's here now for part 2. The original, if you guys were here, we already have 23 people in the house, so that's a good start. But we talked for 2 hours, and I had to shut Don off because we could have kept going for 3 or 4 hours. And I don't want to make the chat so long that you lose interest in it, because it is amazing history. So we said the same thing tonight. We'll talk to about 9 or a little less, just depends on where we are in the history. And if we have to do a part 3, we'll do a part 3. So one of the things that I wanted to give a shout out to was a guy named Kenneth Cohagen. Kenneth wrote me a note, a message, and a comment on the video, the live chat with Don last week, and said, this is Kenneth Cohagen. I had a shop teacher in Peoria, Arizona. His name was Don Losito. I had him for 3 different shop classes. He was the greatest teacher, taught things very well so I could explain things. In 1976, he brought in a 66 Chevy 2 with a 283, which they punched to a 292. They put a roller cam in it, high compression, and a Dominator, and went racing at Beeline. Thing was running like in the 1090 class, ran a best of a 1089. Do you remember that, Don?
Yes, that was my Chevy 2 back then. Yeah, it was actually a 350.
Okay.
But it ran really good.
Nice, and that was 1976.
Yeah, I actually got in trouble at that school. There was a big wrestling meet, and we were there working late to get it ready for the Winter Nationals, and I did burnouts outside.
Okay.
On the asphalt, and somebody called the police, and they came up to me figuring they were going to arrest me, you know, and I said, well, I'm the teacher here, and the cop, he said, you're the what? I said, I'm the teacher. And he said, oh God, boy, did I get called into the principal's office that Monday. But I was always in trouble, you know. I wasn't one of the, I was in a different world teaching automotive, and kind of a renegade. But
I love it.
That's kind of a funny story. That at least they didn't arrest me. That really would have been bad.
Yeah, your students could bail you out.
I used to do a lot of neat projects with, the students.
Man, that's great.
Uh,
That someone remembers and someone's still around and to make a comment on that, just shows the
yeah.
impression that you left on people, Don.
Oh yeah. I think that's 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over 50
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Wow, 50.
Amazing.
Nice. So
Yeah. I
here's,
had a lot of great students. In fact, quite a few of them worked for me.
do they really?
Yeah. Yeah. Curtis Skousen, Tim Derby, Kenneth Weedman, and his brother, Bobby Weedman. They all worked for me, and they were students
Nice.
when I had my engine shop
Okay.
after I quit teaching.
Now,
Yeah.
now the last time that we talked, this is where we stopped. I remember because I wrote it down. I didn't want to forget. But we were
Yeah.
talking about the history that you had starting with the Ford C3 had, the Yates stuff. Now, you had mentioned that you went to Eck Foundry in Wisconsin with Mose Nolan, and we're down there working on the cores. Do you remember talking about that?
Yes.
So that's kind of where we left off. So what's your experience with the Ford C3 stuff, the Yates stuff?
Well, when I first saw it, there were some things I wanted to fix right away. They were using a step rocker system,
Okay.
and they would actually weld the intake side to the exhaust side.
Right.
The intake is at a splayed angle, two angle,
Yep.
and the exhaust was at a single angle, and they were on a different plane from one another.
Okay.
To get the rocker geometry right. And so you had that setup for each, cylinder,
Yes.
if you want to put it that way. Each intake and exhaust valve for each cylinder. So they were welded together, and I thought, and then there was a big gap in between the head bolt holes. And so you're looking at a stress situation going on there. And, I wanted to use the head for drag racers also. And, with roller cams, high spring pressures, high RPMs.
Yep.
And I knew it wouldn't work. And then lo and behold, some of the NASCAR teams were actually cracking the head at the intake port where the rockers stand was,
Yep.
So, just a bad deal. So I talked to Mose, and maybe others did too. I'm not going to take all the credit.
Sure.
I'm sure other people saw the same problem, but I got him to take and change the casting to where we had a rocker pad the full length of the head. And then I said, Mose, just counterbore for the head bolt hole only, no separation. So it's solid one piece except for the head bolt holes. And he did it. It seems like anything you wanted, Mose would do. He would work with Eck on changing the patterns, and it's expensive anytime you do that. So he had to get approval from Ford.
Sure.
So that improved that head a lot. And then about that time, the Bush series was coming in, and Ford, it was a 9-to-1 compression rule. So you needed a deeper chamber. And so what we did, we called it the C3L head, where it had an extra 100 thousandths on the deck.
Okay.
And then, so that gave me a good situation to where I could take that C3L head and take advantage of that deck height. And I put a thicker intake valve sheet in it. And for the open guys, like, the Cup Series, where they were unlimited compression back then, in the early days, then it became 14-to-1, and now it's 12-to-1.
Okay.
Unless they've changed again. They're down to, people don't know this, but NASCAR is between 550 and 650 horsepower.
You mean currently?
That's it. That is it.
Currently, they are.
Yeah, currently. Where, you know, at the highlight of the D3, you know, you were 900 horsepower.
Wow.
But we'll get back to the C3
Yeah.
here because we got a lot to talk about. So prior to Moe's getting the casting done, I thought of a way to put a one-piece bar on that head instead of the step rockers.
Yes.
And so what I did is I flat machined. The exhaust side was flat, and that was the lowest point of the rocker pad. So I set up the CNC machine to just skim at that angle, flat, just clean it up, and then it made the intake flat to it.
Yeah.
You know, you had gaps in between
Yep.
and all that, but still, then we could have a one-piece rocker bar. And then I worked with T&D and Jessel on that, and they put the proper angles and everything and location, and we worked. Jessel does things different than T&D, so as far as the way they like the rocker to roll over the valve. Now, if you want to take a few minutes, I can discuss that. It's up to you.
Let me
or do it at another time because it could take a while.
Let me tell you this, because there's a couple of people that want to say something to you. So Andy from Unity Motorsports Garage is here. He wants to tell you that David Vizard said, tell Don hello.
Okay, great. Yeah, David and his wife Josephine are coming over for Thanksgiving. They come over every year. I've known David since he moved in Charlotte. He used to use my shop quite a bit. You know, since 2000, the year, 2000.
Okay.
So he used to use the dyno, and you know, I let him use whatever he needed.
Nice.
He's a great guy. Known him a long time. Still talk to him today.
Perfect.
You know, a lot.
Well, it's good to have you guys here. Thank you, Andy, for giving us that shout out there for Don. How about this one, Don? I'm not sure if Don knows this or not. The Mountain Motor Pro Stock record holding motor has a set of his heads that Don did.
Yeah, that would be probably, well, it could be several. It could be a Dodge, it could be a Chevy or a Ford. I did all three.
Nice.
Oh, yeah, that is, tell me his name because I know it.
Greg Ertman is the guy that's telling me, but I don't know who he's talking about.
Yeah, I did Mountain Motor heads for John Cossey.
Okay.
And then the Dodges. Oh, yeah, I wasn't planning on talking about Mountain Motors.
No, we won't get into it. We're just saying.
We even did
Pete Burner.
You know, he in GM, and we did a billet manifold for him, and it didn't have one piece of weld in it. It was totally adjustable, runner lengths and
Wow.
plenum depth. Not one piece of weld. I mean, nothing. Everything was O-ringed, and everything was billet.
Now, he said it was for Pete Burner. Does that sound familiar?
Pete Burner. That's correct.
Yep.
Yeah, nice. He ran, you know, he had Pontiac.
Okay.
Or Chevrolet engine.
Yep.
You know, yeah.
So here's what we'll go back now. So what you're saying is the rocker arm pedestals, what you first want to do is weld them all up so they're all tied in to give them the strength.
No, that's what the teams were doing.
Okay.
I didn't want any part of that. No, that's not my world.
Yep.
Let me tell you right now.
So you want to tie it together.
I put a stop. Once I saw that, I said, no, this ain't going to happen.
Okay.
So that's when I got them with Moe's, and we made. Well, first I machined, you know, the head I had to work with, and made it a flat bar, so we could use a one piece bar, and then that one-piece bar is machined for the shaft-mounted rockers individually.
Okay.
You know, but it was a one-piece solid steel bar, so you had the strength. And then I got Moe's to change the casting.
Okay.
And then for the C3L head, all that was done. And so then we had a nice piece to work with that, I didn't have the fear of breaking the top of the intake port.
Okay.
And another thing I asked Moe's to do is, there were no dowel locations anywhere on that head that you could work with as a datum point.
Yeah.
And I always like to have a datum point to work with. So we put 2 exhausts on the exhaust flange, toward the front of the head and toward the rear of the head on the exhaust flange, put 3/8 dowel holes.
Okay.
And then I had a datum point so I could keep track of my deck, because the final CNC machining would be I'm just going to go from the bottom of the dowel. It's just an easier reference.
Okay.
Was 405 thousandths. All my heads, even today, the D3, I kept that same deal going with Ford. Every head that comes out of Ultra Pro starts at 405 from the bottom of the dowel to the deck.
Okay.
And then if I get a head in for repair, I know how much is milled off of it. And let's say I had to weld the chamber or the bowl or whatever.
Sure.
I could shim that head back to the 405 pin height and then run my normal program instead of going, I wonder how much they decked off of it.
Right.
So that was a big deal there. And then plus having that C3L head that had the extra 100 on the deck.
Yep.
I raised the seat ring, and I actually had a taller short turn on the C3.
Okay.
I always like to use a 500 thick seat, and especially the exhaust. They generate so much heat. It's just a good thing to have that extra 100 thousandths.
Okay.
Because Ford, when they first came out, they had a 400 thousandths thick, like the C3. It was 400 thousandths thick intake.
Yep.
And a 375 thick exhaust. And that's just, it'll hold, but it's just not a good deal.
Okay.
And then, especially when they went to the unleaded fuel, that they had a lot of issues back then. So then we could offer that head in a deep chamber for the Bush series.
Okay.
9-to-1 compression. And another thing that this did is a lot of the teams, they build engines for Bush and their Cup engines. Well, they could take their Cup engine heads, that they've cycled through and say, okay, then I would CNC the chamber and make it a 9-to-1 compression head. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Go from one class to the next.
They could keep using them.
Right.
That way they could have fresher stuff. It was kind of a convenient situation for the NASCAR teams to have that, because they could reuse their parts, because the Bush series engine, they couldn't get the money for leasing those as you get for a Cup, so they had to figure out how to cut corners, and that was one way to do it. And they could reuse the rods, and in some cases they were even reusing the pistons.
Wow.
So it made for a money-making deal for them, and I'm glad I was able to help them.
So with the
Go
C3L, where does, I mean, there was a C35 too, but where does the C3H come into play? Where's that in the progression?
Okay. Well, first I got to finish the C3.
Okay.
Okay. Then I asked Mose if he could give me, instead of a finished guide bore, I asked him to just put a 3/8 hole in it, 375,000.
Okay.
Where a normal guide bore is 500. Back then, for some reason, Ford used 501, and they used the 503 guide. You want to have 2,000 press on a guide.
Okay.
But you know, that gave me the option for aftermarket to move the guide bores around. And so the first I did was well, let me get the valve size first on
Yep.
the C3.
Okay.
It was a 2 inches, 125 thousandths intake, and it was a 1.600 thousandths exhaust.
Okay.
So what I did, I moved the exhaust guide 15 thousandths toward the cylinder wall and 15 thousandths toward the exhaust flange. So, 2 moves, an X and Y move in my world. And that gave me room to put a 2150 intake in with a Z1600. And I did that for a while, and then I looked at it and I thought, okay, I'm going to move the intake guide also, and then a 180 inch 600. Or if a guy wanted to, I could use a 2150 intake and an inch 625 exhaust.
Okay.
So had more options there. And I used that for aftermarket because we were using the head for drag racing and other things. And then I got them to, I was looking at the spark plug location, when I enlarged the valves, it became kind of an issue. So I asked Mose to give me castings with no spark plug holes. So back in those days, I was doing so many heads, I would get 50 at a time. So, it wasn't that big of a deal, to have special things done if you got 50. So then I moved the spark plug, and that picked up 5 horsepower just by moving the spark plug. And 5 horsepower is a lot,
Wow.
Just for one change. So those are the transitions we did with the C3. And then I used to go there and we'd rub cores on the C3 because the original head had a big dip wall on the intake side.
Okay.
A pretty good size one. And some of the teams I was doing the heads for wanted all that to be straight. I'm not going to give the names of the teams because I never divulge proprietary information, but so we rubbed cores to make that straight, and we did some other things so the head would clean up nicer. And then one time when I was up there, I went up there more than once. Let's see, 2 times. The last time we wanted to do a high port intake head. It was called the C3 Yates.
Yes.
And I did the intake core while I was up there. I made a sand mold of it and modify it to where it would, have room to make a high port intake. We left the exhaust the same at that time. They didn't want to do anything with the exhaust. So at least we had that. And then I used to get 50 of those at a time. I'd buy them from RDI. They're no longer in business.
Yep, I know who they are.
Barry was great to work with, and so they gave me a good deal, because all they had to do was call Ford, and they drop shipped the castings to me. So it was just a matter of paperwork.
Wow.
And I did a lot of C3Hs, but I really didn't get finished with the C3 because, we were doing Chevrolet 18 degrees, and then this C3, there was nobody doing what I did,
Okay.
especially being in Charlotte. So I kept getting call after call, even Bush engine builders and NASCAR teams, and we did work for Robert Yates. He was the well, actually, he wasn't my first Ford. Promoter, who did 5 Fords, they were my first Ford customer.
Okay.
Bob Heiner worked there, and Peter Giles owned it back then. Dennis bought it from him, and he's doing a great job keeping the company going. And one of my employees, Jim Taylor, works there. One of my former employees works there. And Jim was our fabricator. He came down from, I guess, New York or somewhere in there in '97. And then in 2006, he went up to Pro Motor. Been there since. And he could do sheet metal manifolds. He built all our sheet metal valve covers. We used a billet rail, and yeah, he's very talented. I bought with aluminum, you need to use helium and argon. So I bought this Smith mixer to where you can dial in how much argon or helium you need. Prior to that, we were having the gas company mix it, and they would get it contaminated, and it would snap, crackle, pop. It was costing us a fortune. So I got off subject as I think again, but kind of interesting.
Yes.
But then, of course, we got into billet valve covers, and then once you do that, you don't go back to sheet metal. They're too much work. And we were doing work for all the teams, the Fords and Robert Yates, Alan Kowicki,
yep,
Stavola Brothers, Roger Penske, Jack Roush, and a friend of mine, Bob Heiner. I don't think I told this story last time. He came to me, and he worked for Jack Roush,
yep,
and he worked in Liberty. Jack has an R&D facility there, in Liberty, North Carolina, near Richard Petty. And he wanted me to do a set of hits for him, and he was going to build the engine. And he built it, and it picked up 10 horsepower. I mean, over what they had. And he said, I'm personally taking this engine up. I'm personally going to be there when they dyno it. And he did. And then all of a sudden, Jack Roush is on the phone, personally calling me. And he said, I'm going to send you down castings, and you just keep making them until I tell you don't make any more. And he gave me his private number, to his secretary.
Yeah.
And it was quite an honor to talk to Jack. And, he's one of my heroes from Gap and Roush, back in the drag race days. Yeah. I actually did some of those Gap and Roush Ford heads. They had a raised exhaust port flange that they actually put on the head. But it was a real good head. We're going back to the late 70s here on that head. But then, so basically we were doing every Ford that was in NASCAR, between Pro Motor, Alan Quickie, the Vola brothers, and Junior Johnson.
Yeah.
I told you the story about sitting across the desk from Junior.
Yeah. Yep.
Last time. That was amazing. Getting to do that, and so that kept me busy.
The thing that kills me, Don, is the fact that you're doing Ford heads for the Ford teams. You're also doing Chevy heads for the Chevy teams at the same time.
Not as many Chevys because Hendrick did their own.
Okay.
But we did Petty's, and that was a 2-car team, and then AJ Foyt and Hedrick, not Hendrick, but Hedrick, and Morgan McClure, the independent teams.
Yep.
They're teams, but they're not like a Hendrick where you have 4 cars, but a lot of them had 2 cars. So that kept me busy. That was back in the 18-degree days.
Okay.
18-degree Chevy, and it was a GM head that you had to use. And then doing that plus the C3, and then plus doing Steve Smith's NHRA Pro Stock head starting in I met him in '94, and I told you that story last time.
Yep.
But you just do what you got to do. I was there every night at between midnight and 2 in the morning to put another head on 1 or 2 machines. I mean, that went on for years, and then even later on when we did heat treating, which I'll get into later.
Sure.
I'd be there, in the middle of the night. And still today, I wake, after all these years, I wake up about that time every night, and maybe that's what saved my life. I told you I woke up at 1 and I was paralyzed from that warfarin.
Yep.
It might have saved my life, but because if I would have slept in the morning, all the way through in the morning, I'd been out of blood leaking inside me. But back on subject here,
yep.
It was quite an honor, to do work for all those teams, and I had, Mike Lancy, and Dave Sabatino, who works for Stuart Haas now. He was my first employee, back in the early '90s, and then it was it just flowed smoothly. We were real organized, and didn't have a lot of people really. It just, we knew what we were doing, and Brian Maloney, who now lives in Martinsville, Virginia, he worked for me. He did great finish work, and I told you about Andy Riffle last time, and it just worked out real well. And then we needed to upgrade the C3 for, and in my mind was going to be for aftermarket, plus, SB2 had come out for the GM, and here you're looking at a canted valve head versus the C3 non-canted valve.
Right.
You're looking at a 2125 intake valve Ford versus a 2180 intake valve Chevrolet. Same exhaust size, 1/600.
Yeah.
But think about it. So I'm thinking, okay, let's do something. So we did the C3H, didn't want to go too radical because NASCAR has to approve it, and that's not easy. And believe it or not, I sent heads to Ford. I did port model. We did, Ultra Pro did port models, and I was selling them to dirt late model engine builders and drag racers, so to prove it out. And then sent a set to Ford, and then some of the NASCAR teams to look at, and we submitted it to NASCAR, and they turned it down. And it wasn't even a cannon valve head, and they turned it down. And SB2, Chevy had the SB2 head.
Right.
So I'm thinking, wow, what do we got to do? So the next thing, was the SC1 head, which is the high port intake, high port exhaust. And it was not a cannon valve head. The SC1 head was not a cannon valve head from Ford.
Right.
Now, Ultra Pro took that head and made it a cannon valve head. And when I first looked at it, I said, okay, what will NASCAR accept? So the GM SB2 had a cant of about 3.5. They say it's 4, but I measured it. It's really not. And so I made the cant of the Ultra Pro cannon valve head 3.25 degrees. And then I had to look at the location. I wanted to have a 2-180 valve, and I had to look at the bore size and the valve in relationship to the cylinder wall, because that's critical to have a good piston.
Okay.
You can't race without a good piston.
Yep.
And I had to look at that location for NASCAR, where they're going to want the ringland all the way up, and for like a turbo guy, to where he doesn't have to have the ringland real far down. But I knew I was limited to 10.5 degrees as far as intake valve angle. Yep. I wanted to go more upright, in the 9-degree area. But I knew NASCAR, they wouldn't take the C3 Yates. They're not going to, take anything more radical than the SB2.
Okay.
So I kind of used that as a guideline, and then looked at the cylinder wall and the piston relationship to the valve location, and then where the exhaust. I left. You know how I told you I shifted the C3 exhaust?
Yep.
I kept that same location.
Okay.
For this head. Because in dirt late model, we're only, they started at a 4-125 bore, and a lot of the aluminum drag race blocks, 4-125 bore. And so I kept keeping that boundary. And so I did the head, and we did ports, because I was getting the head as a raw casting. That's the only way I could do it.
So raw
and
SC1.
Go ahead.
It's a raw SC1 to start with.
Yeah, raw SC1, not one head bolt hole in it.
Yep.
So Mo's got me the prints. He got me the water jacket prints, so I knew where the water jacket was and where I could machine and lighten the head, and we had to put all that in CAD. So we could tell. And I had the casting datum points, so I knew where to start to where to set the head on a fixture. We had to put a datum point fixture to hold the head down to do the first machining, because that's critical. And so we did it from a very raw, right out of the foundry, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay.
In fact, when they came to me, they just came to me on a pallet. They didn't even put them in boxes. They were just all stacked on one another.
Wow.
And so I would rough machine them, and then I had a Rockwell tester, and I checked the Rockwell on them, and they were all over the place. Oh no. So then I had to buy Dale Peterson, was getting out of the welding business, and he had a heat treat oven. And so I bought his oven, and it was a real good oven. It would hold 4 heads. And I used it to start with for stress relieving. What you have to do, and this is quite involved, and it's critical, took the cylinder heads up to 990 degrees for 14 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I had 4 individual plastic water drums.
Yep.
That I had about 3/4 full of water. And they were in the heat treat room, and it was a closed room. So that they were getting some temperature in them, because, the oven was 990 degrees. So it isn't like I was going to quench in cold water, because you don't want to do that.
Right.
So from Dale Peterson, I got this fire suit with the head shield and
big gloves.
I wore Nomex gloves, like 3 different layers, and I would take that 990 degree head and open up the oven and grab it and get it into the water as fast as I could. 4 heads, and man, my hands were on fire. I got those gloves off so quick after that. Well, you can imagine.
Oh, hell yeah.
And here I am. Usually it was 2 in the morning. I'm there at 2 in the morning doing this, anywhere from midnight to 4 in the morning. It was just varied, because you had to time it for that 14 hours. You didn't want to overcook them. And I remember one night I stumbled and I almost fell backwards. And oh man, it would have killed me.
Oh yeah.
It would have just burned me in half. So I'm fortunate that I never got hurt, other than hot hands, but never damaged them. But I did that for a long time, because
now this is after you did the work on them or before?
I would rough machine them.
Yep.
So I try to get machine most of the stress out of them.
Okay.
So we roughed everything. Rough poured them, and roughed the rocker rail down, roughed the spring pockets, roughed they were raw, so roughed the intake flange, the exhaust flange, everything, the deck.
Okay.
So it was a totally roughed head. No guide bores were in it, no spark plug holes, no push rods. I didn't do any of that work.
Right.
Rough machined the front and rear of the head, because it was raw. But in machining, you had to rough it anyway. But except for, normally you just go in there and rough and finish, because you were at that XY position and have that tool in. But I had to do it twice because of this. And but it's something I had to do. I can't send out. The heads are supposed to be 64 Rockwell B on the B scale, and they would come in at 40. Shoot, the head can run for years, and and not be 40. So it was something I had to do, and then got through that drill, and then we were getting heads out to dirt late model.
Okay.
turbo drag race. Bennett Racing built a bunch of them. Turbo, nitrous, blower,
Wow.
gasoline, alcohol, combination of everything, and drag racing. And then I got with Joe Ryan, who I had actually done C3 heads for. So I'd already been doing work for him, and told him about this new head because ARCA didn't have rules, and he was Frank Kimmel's engine builder, and probably the best ARCA driver ever. And so I did this head, the cannon valve Ultra Pro head out of the SC1 casting for Joe Ryan, and he built engines for Frank Kimmel and ARCA, because I knew if we got it into ARCA, the teams would, feel more confident about it, and then because there again, some of the Ford guys, oh, we don't want a cannon valve head, we just don't want it. So I had to prove it, and so I did the ARCA, the drag racing, and then the dirt late model. I did with Jack Cornett was my first dirt late model customer back in in the early '90s or mid to late '90s, and because in the early '90s I didn't have time. All I did is NASCAR and Steve Schmidt, and then I started getting into the other things, and I knew I had to have different venues to prove this head out. So we didn't have any cooling issues in ARCA or in any of the other type of racing. So I was confident. So then I reported to Moses Nolan, what was going on, because he was the head engineer for racing, and then he asked me to machine a set of heads for Robert Yates, for Roger Penske Racing, for Jack Rouse, and for Ford Motorsport. So I did. And that was between 2002, right in there.
Okay.
And then nothing happened, and I'm thinking, what's going on? And then Mose calls me and asks me for another set that they were going to, really get going. And what he did, he had Jack Rouse's engine shop build an engine complete, and they were real happy with it. And Ford went to NASCAR in 2003, and that head got approved, believe it or not. And they only they changed one rocker bolt hole from what way I had it, and I had the intake flange bolt holes to where you had no push rod interference, because so many engine builders have had to deal with, putting short bolts in. You hardly have any clamping force because the push rod's in the way.
Yep.
So I made sure, I'm an engine builder, so I look at little things like that. And so I made sure none of that happened. And what did they do? They moved two of my bolt holes into push rods.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, wow. So there's the Ultra Pro cannon valve bolt hole location, and then there's the D3 intake flange bolt pattern.
Okay.
So they didn't move a spark plug hole. They didn't move a guide board. They didn't, nothing. I had to tweak the intake flange height a little bit from what I had it, because NASCAR dictated the height. They came up with some theory, and then I was on this D3 in development. Anytime I can put a round exhaust port in a head, I will. And the D3 started out as a 1.750 exit diameter.
Okay.
And I eventually made that a 1/800. In all the heads we do now, well, 90% of them. So that and then we ended up once it got approved, Ford sent all these blueprints out, and some of these teams had done the CAD work on our head, and just to see where everything was, because they had a feeling it would get approved. And then they compared the head I sent them to what Ford submitted and got approved. Well, they basically, it's the Ultra Pro head.
Right.
And I didn't get a dime for it. Nothing. All that work I did,
That's crazy.
Didn't get a dime. Wow. Doug Yates called me and he said, Ford owes you a phone call. This is your head that got approved by NASCAR. Doug knew it. He made a special phone call to let me know what was going on. But the only good thing is, now what? Roush Yates was building all the Ford engines. If you wanted a Ford engine, you got it from Roush Yates. Okay. So Doug calls me, and the original D3 heads were an SC1 head, and Ford just took off the SC1 and put a D3 there. It's M6049 D3 where it was SC1. Same casting. Same heat treat problem. So what do I have to do? I have to go, Doug wanted me to do all their heads to start with until they could get going. So we started actually late in 2003 and then got really ramped up 2004. But so I had to do these from a raw casting because the heat treat was still, especially for NASCAR. So I had to only a lot more pressure on me. Before, dirt late model customer, they don't have the demand of a NASCAR team where they've got to, especially Roush Yates, how many engine customers they have. So I'd get 50 heads in and I'd get a phone call, where's our heads? Not from the secretary. And I'm thinking, wow, I just got them. Well, we need them, so man. So to start with, I developed a port. Ultra Pro developed a port. I'm not going to personally take credit for anything. It's a team effort. We developed a NASCAR legal port, and kind of interesting. Our intake port that Doug loved. I did a couple sets for Doug Yates to try a straight up port and a twisted port. It was twisted at the intake flange, and I like to do that. Then with a cannon valve, you don't have to twist the port as it goes in down into the port. You twist it at the intake flange. The least movement you can do in a port, the better you'll be.
Okay.
The less friction you have with the air and the fuel. So, with NASCAR, Doug loved the twisted port, and he loved the round exhaust port. So, and he liked the chamber. So I didn't have to change that. So what I did, I'm thinking, okay, he loves that port. So what I did, and was gradually straighten that port up and get it to the right height for NASCAR. So the walls were vertical, perfectly straight.
Yep.
The roof can't be angled or nothing either at the intake flange. So all that had to straighten out. And then didn't touch the bowl, didn't touch the short turn, but then gradually twisted it to match up with the short turn area. So I had to take it from straight and do a gradual twist, so nothing else changed. So there was the NASCAR legal D3 intake port and D3 head. And we were doing it from a raw casting. And believe it or not, this is, I don't know how I did it, or we did it as a group, but in a way I had a lot to do with it because I was there every night, putting heads on machines and also stress relieving and 325 heads, 2004 for Roush Yates.
Wow. I mean, you're
Plus
working
our other work.
24/7, it seems like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 And then we did the same amount in 2005. And in 2005, the government mandated that the foundries not use a certain kind of glue to hold the patterns together, the sand castings together. They changed it. And the foundry changed the glue and it wouldn't hold. And what we were getting was porosity in certain areas that seemed to concentrate in the spring pocket area on the exhaust side. And I wouldn't know until we totally machined a head. And oh, geez. And then they didn't want any welded heads. So boy, oh boy, that really put a wrinkle in things. And that was a nightmare.
Wow.
So what I did, I had to get through that, and it was a struggle because we had to be so careful. And I tried to catch it early on, naturally. Pressure test after the first rough machining before, I did the stress relieving and heat treating. And I normally it wouldn't show up there. It wouldn't show up until the final machining after everything was done. And so what I did, I saw the handwriting on the wall that, okay, if Ultra Pro wants to stay in business and aftermarket, in drag racing, we got to have a billet head. And I looked, well, prior to that, in the SC1 casting, I wanted to have another head other than the D3 style because I knew I could do a better head, but I knew NASCAR wouldn't approve it. So what I did, I made I wanted to go 9 degree on the intake and went 9 degree by 3 1/4 cant. And kept the exhaust the same. I talked to a bunch of the engine builders and they really didn't want a splayed valve head. They didn't want a canted exhaust. So I kept it at 8 by 0. But with the 9 degree, I had a bunch of options. I could go 2 180 inch 650, 2 230 inch 625. I'm talking valve sizes here.
No, I got it.
And then for like Australian Pro Stock, I could actually, if the guy had the right cam, 2260 inch 600. Most of them, the ones I did were, to be safe, were 2250 inch 600 exhaust, 2250 intake. So, you know, compared to a 2180 valve that the D3 was, I mean, I'm really making an improvement. And what the first ones I did were out of the SC1 casting. By it being a 9 degree, the push rod moved closer to the intake flange. Well, there wasn't enough intake flange material, so we had to weld the intake flange. There wasn't enough casting in the intake spring pocket, so we had to weld it. Jim Taylor did all that. And then machined the head and made it the first Ultra Pro 9 degree canted valve head. And then, you know, and it ran really good. You know, I did it for drag racing. John Bennett built the first one, and I can't remember if I did it, if Jack Coronet built one. Later on, he built the billet head version. But so I was real happy. So then I got the dilemma of the D3 casting because of the glue, and Mose was trying all kinds of things. And just to get ahead of myself, they actually didn't fix the problem 100% until around 2010, and that's when I started using the D3 head again. Okay, back to the 9 degree. So I'm thinking we got to build a billet head. We had already built, you know, this is mainly a Ford talk that we're doing. But I had already built a 9 degree inline Chevy head in billet. And so we knew what to do. You know, we knew how to do it. Went through the growing pains there. And it was fully water jacketed. We would open up the head and do all kind of crazy 5-axis machining and then machine special weld plates and weld them on. And then, you know, I didn't like the look of the weld, so then we'd put it back in the machine after they're welded, and weld them flat so you couldn't even tell they were a welded head. So then we had to look at the Ford. Ford, being it's a 10-bolt head, it's a lot easier than the Chevy. And I wanted to make sure we had the same water flow as the D3 because I was going to use it in ARCO with Frank Kimmel. And, you know, dirt late models need a lot of water. And then I had been doing desert trucks in the D3, and the short course trucks in the D3, so I wanted to, you know, make it usable for that series also. So we went through, I mean, a lot of work. Kept looking at different ways to get water in it, and everything's so tight. You know, you got your seats in the way, you got your chamber in the way, and then I didn't want to just hog out above the chamber. I wanted to have a little pad in the center to support the chamber. Because that's, you know, you can get some serious water around in that area, but I wanted to support it real well because of all the cylinder, you know, pressure required on a dual turbo or supercharged engine, you know. So we looked at all that, and boy, we really made a nice water jacket. Glenn Wooten worked for me then, and it was all done on the Gettings and Lewis huge horizontal machine. I spent about $700,000 on that machine, not counting tooling, and
Wow.
about $100,000 in tooling. 100 tools, and some of them were real expensive.
It's crazy.
And it had a Renishaw probe where it actually you could program it to inspect your work. Pretty neat. And it had a laser tool setter. Well, it still does. It still runs.
But it took a tool bit and went through the side of the head to make the water jacket in a billet.
Yeah, we went through the ends,
Yep.
the exhaust flange. We went through the spring, the spring pocket side. We went through some areas in there. Went through under the intake ports, into that area.
Yep.
Everywhere, with end mills and ball end mills and drills where you needed to.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it had as much water as the D3 Ford. Wow. And it would flow as good or better water flow as the D3 Ford. I was determined.
Could you say, like a comparison, let's say you put the D3 on a 400 cubic inch engine. If you put that 9-degree billet head on there, is there a way to extrapolate the horsepower? Are you going to pick up from experience? Could you say, oh yeah, that thing would pick up 20 horsepower over the regular, D3
head? It would, if you compared the 2 180 valve,
yep,
D3 to the 2 180, she had a dirt late model 2 180 valve, only it had an inch 625 exhaust.
Okay.
I could have gone in 650, but most of the guys just wanted inch 625. If you compare those two heads with the same type of intake,
yep,
same carburetor, same headers, because the headers fit identical on both because it was the same exhaust port.
Yes.
It was 25 horsepower.
Wow.
By going from a 10.5 degree to a 9 degree.
Yep.
And with the 9 degree, you got a flatter valve angle. So you remember I was telling you about the piston deal?
Yeah. Yeah.
You got a way better piston.
Okay.
I mean, extremely better.
Got it.
So it was a win-win. And I guess in a way it was, and we did, so many of these heads. I couldn't tell you how many. There again, when we did this, we had to look at the valve situation compared to the cylinder wall.
Okay.
That because this was a whole new head on the intake side.
Right.
So we had to look at that's the first thing you have to do. You never sacrifice a piston just because you want to put a big valve in something.
Okay.
There's so much engineering involved, and then you got to look at new rocker geometry, and and it's just and push rod angles, and all that is reliability and horsepower. Getting that push rod as straight as you possibly can.
Yep.
It's a drill that you go through, but it pays. You spend the time up front, so you don't have to redo it later. Okay. That's why I was just a stickler to make sure we get it right the first time, because it's so much work if you don't. Because you went through all that work and it didn't work, wasn't successful, you do it all over again. Oh man. Wow. A small business can't do that.
Oh yeah. Jesus.
So that's how we went from the C3 to the C3 Yates, the SC1, and then the 9-degree billet head. And you know, I could have spent a lot more time on the C3 because I couldn't tell you how many ports. Stavola Brothers had their own port that we digitized.
Okay.
The Robert Yates had, I couldn't tell you how many ports I did for Robert Yates. Unbelievable amount. Because, you know, all the years we did heads for him. And Dale Jarrett won the championship in '99, you know, with heads we machined for Robert. And he was second or third many years. And, you know, and then we won the championship with Kurt Busch 2004, first year the D3 came out. So that was a pretty big deal. And, you know, for a independent, and I couldn't tell you how many dirt late model championships we've won. I mean, geez, or drag race deals, or there's been a lot of fun.
So each team had a different port. Who's the one that designed the ports for each team? The engine builder, or
well, their cylinder head people would do it
and told you this is what we want.
Most of the teams used our ports.
Okay.
You know, just Stavola Brothers and Robert Yates, they had their own port.
Yep.
Everybody else used ours.
Okay.
So, but, you know, I would do anything anybody wanted. If they wanted to run our stuff, fine. If they wanted to run their own or tweak ours, or, you know, say, hey, will you do this, 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 or this? You know, I'd do it. Whatever that, you know, it's all about pleasing that engine builder to his package.
Right.
And Robert was, you know, he's an engine guy, so he really appreciated what we did. And I don't know if did I tell this story last time? Ernie Irwin in '97 won the pole at the Brickyard 400.
No, I don't remember it.
Okay, yeah, Ernie Irvin. He was driving he drove the 28, and Dale Jarrett drove the 88 for Robert. And he was on the pole at Brickyard 400 in 1997. And the driver award, well, along with money, but was they won a custom van, and it had Brickyard 400 decals all over it, and you know, and Doug Yates came up to me and gave me the keys to it. They gave it to me. Robert drove it home from Indianapolis, and then Doug drove it up and gave it to me. Said, it's yours.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was probably a Chevy van too, right?
What's that?
I said it's probably a Chevy van too.
Yeah, it's a Chevy. Of course, he couldn't keep it anyway. But yeah, that was great. You know, I'm thinking of me and appreciation, you know, for what we were doing for them. They knew how hard I worked, and yeah, it was Glavin was the custom manufacturer. I still have it today.
Wow.
Yeah, still have it today.
No kidding.
Yeah, 97. Yeah, still in great shape.
Still drive it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's
very nice.
You know, we're going on a trip, my son and I, to Martinsville. That's where the machines are moved to, and get them running next week. We'll be there all next week. But you know, we could talk more about the C3. You know,
let me. I'm going to ask you one question.
We did quite a few drag race deals with it. And go ahead.
So,
ask me a question.
yep. First, to give a shout out to you, John Salvatore. Thank you for the $20 donation to DragBoss Garage. He says, great stuff. Thanks, Tim and Don, for a great, interesting lecture. All I can say is wow. So thank you for that. The question I had, Don, was if you look at the evolution of the exhaust ports, the ones that I've been used to with the A3 are all round. As they went to the C3 stuff, they were more rectangular square, really square rather than rectangle on the exhaust ports. What was the benefit from going from round to rectangle or square versus you said you like round exhaust ports when possible?
Yeah. Here's the deal.
Okay.
If you have enough length in the port to where you can get it to round, you know, you either want to be like if it's a splayed valve head or you know, a canted exhaust, you might want to have a angled floor to match the cant.
Okay.
And then a D-shaped kind of thing, you know, with nice big radiuses.
Yep.
And think about what the header builder has to go through. Think about what they have to do. If it's a square port or a rectangular port, what's a header tube?
Round.
They're all round.
Yeah.
So they have to manually or build a swedging tool.
Yep.
To try to match that, and then it abruptly goes from that shape to round. Boom, and it's not a good thing. So any chance I can, I try to make a round port.
Okay.
And with the D3 being the exhaust flange is at 90 degrees, so it's way out there. You got plenty of room to do it. Or some of the Chevy stuff, you know, it's an angled exhaust flange.
Okay.
And fairly short exhaust port. It's a little harder to do the transition to get enough area out. So,
okay.
Calvin Elston Exhaust. When I worked for Kenny Bernstein, I was his first customer. I'd been in '89 when he moved down to Charlotte, and he's one of the best header builders in the country. Real smart, intelligent person. And you know, I showed him my first round exhaust. He said, "Oh man, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. You know, why can't everybody do that?" Yeah, he was just so excited. So, you know, the D3, Roush Yates, you know, they got a lot of smart people up there. They never changed it. You know, they kept round all the way through it. It just makes sense.
Right. Okay.
You can make such a nice header, and then I used to make header flanges for our head where they were half-inch thick. Half of it matched the exhaust exit perfectly.
Okay.
And then I would counter bore for the round exhaust tube about halfway in. And then the guy could just set that tube in there, weld it, and done. You know, perfect alignment every time.
Oh, wow.
And I made different diameter versions, you know. The smallest we could do was 1 7/8. And then we had 2 inch, 2 1/8, 2 1/4.
What was a common header size that made good power on those engines?
Well, you know, the dirt late model guys would have to be 1 7/8 because of they need that torque.
Yep.
that low end torque. But you know, in drag race, it just depends. Like a turbo, you can't get too big. A single turbo at the exit,
Okay.
you know, around a 2-inch.
Yep.
Some of the guys will 2-inch and 7/8 because they're nervous. But if you know, do things right, you can use a 2-inch primary with like the D3 type head, and then you can step it out as you go.
Okay.
Nitrous, you can use, you know, a bigger, and a blower, you can use a bigger.
Okay.
Because blower spools up instantly, you know.
Yep.
It's all about, you know, we're talking drag race here.
Sure.
Because, you know, with a single turbo, you only have so much time to get up the boost. You know, for the old yellow-green.
Yep. Nope. I see
you
it.
got to go.
Wow.
So, yeah, we look at all that, but yeah, I'm a round exhaust port type guy, and
okay.
And like our Top Fuel Harley Nitro, there's such a weird. The exhaust flange has to come out at an angle so they can get headers on them, and it's round on the top, but it's a angled floor, and then you put a round pipe on it, you know. But they're up to 2 1/4, 2 3/8, 2 1/2.
Wow.
2 3/4 stuff. I mean, monster pipes. Everybody's got a little different idea, but you know, you're talking. We put 2 nitro nozzles in that head, and the fuel they put through those things is unbelievable. 2 cylinders, they're making 1,000 horsepower, naturally aspirated.
Wow. Dang it. Yeah, I don't know much about bikes. I never knew how much horsepower they made.
Yeah, it's unreal. And the quickest time has been 6.02.
Wow.
That was a blower bike.
Okay.
But we've had naturally aspirated, you know, like 610, 614. And they'll run 240. They've got 2 spark plugs per head.
Yep.
And yeah, they're amazing. But now, you know, if you want to talk more about the C3, we can, because there's a lot of other.
The difference between a C3 and the C3H was the height, correct?
Intake port height only. The same exhaust.
Okay.
It wasn't a cannon valve. Same guide locations.
Yep.
But I had the option, you know, I moved things around.
Okay.
You know, so it was a 2 180-inch 600 valve. And then I'm glad it turned out good that NASCAR turned that head down, because, you know, then they would have been stuck with it for years.
Right.
To where at least they got a cannon valve. You know, I'll tell you an interesting story, and I'm kind of proud of this. You know, I came up with that 9-degree head.
Yep.
For the cannon valve. You know, just thinking what would be an ideal situation here that we could do on a small block Ford. And, you know, I forgot how many years later Toyota got in to NASCAR in the truck series. And what was it? 9-degree intake, cannon valve. And Toyota, I don't know how they got away with it, but they put a 2-degree cant on their exhaust, and NASCAR didn't catch it.
Wow.
And they, you know, it ran in the truck series for quite a while. That's how they started out. And then when they were going to get approved for trucks, you know, enough of the competitive engine builders told NASCAR, "Hey, you know what this head is?" And then they made them change the casting, change the head. Well, change,
Get rid
of that can.
Yeah.
And the Toyota came up with a whole different head.
Wow.
But boy, they really, their engineering is really, really good.
Was that Toyota?
They came up with a Toyota. Yeah. They looked at everything, they cut every little gram out, every chance, every place they could, and they strengthened everything where it needed to be strengthened, and they did a real good job. And so there's the truck head, and then there's the NASCAR Cup head that they did. Did you
ever? What was it like to talk to Robert Yates? He seems like a humble guy, quiet when you see pictures and interaction. What was he like as a person?
Oh, he was great. He cared so much, and wanted to win, and wanted to just, have the best of the best. And he was really dedicated.
Okay.
He treated his employees, golden. And, Robert, he's one of a kind. And he was a friend, really.
Okay.
Business, yes, but I considered Robert a friend. I mean, he'd come by when we moved in the new building. He'd come by and just visit, and back in, let's just go back to 99.
Yeah.
Back then, a crew chief made $500,000 a year.
Is that what they
plus
make?
Bonuses.
Really?
Yes.
See, I never knew that.
Yeah. Not too many people did.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, who knows what they make today?
How about the guy that puts the fuel in?
Repeat that?
How about the guy that dumps the fuel in? Changes the tire.
Oh, yeah. Well, most of those guys, we called them weekend warriors, like when I worked for Kenny Bernstein.
Okay.
Back in my day in NASCAR, 80, 89, 90, 91, we used weekend warriors for some of the tire changing, and the gas man. Cecil Tipton was our jack man. He was a fabricator, great one. He's a great guy. He was a great friend. But nowadays they're professional athletes, so I can imagine what they get paid.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they are professional athletes. They're full-time. They have to work out in the gym. They have to, do all kind of practicing, and it's a different world. Today it's totally different than in my day. They were starting to get to that. I mean, they would practice before race day, but it was like, okay, the body man would do this. There was you put together as many as you could with your regular crew, and then you would have other people just fly in for the race. Yeah, that's the way it was back then.
Wow.
Not anymore, though, boy. It's man, it's like, a football player, a wide receiver dropping a pass. In NASCAR, you're in trouble. You drop that big lug nut or whatever.
Yep.
Nowadays it's just one. They finally got smart there. Where in the old days it was 5. And that was tough.
Wow. Crazy stuff.
They would glue they'd use that 3M, we called it Yellow Death.
Yeah.
3M weather strip adhesive.
Yeah.
They would glue the lug nuts to the wheel. They would take a wire brush after every pit stop.
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
and if they had to remount those same wheels, but usually they did that. They had plenty of wheels, so Goodyear would mount all their tires for them.
Wow.
Back then, it was $1,500 a set that Kenny Bernstein had to pay.
That's what the tires
Now,
were?
who knows? You know, NASCAR, Goodyear doesn't give those tires away to the teams.
Oh, they don't.
Buy 'em.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, and Union 76, that was all free fuel.
Yep. Okay.
They gave free fuel, but not the tires. And all the manufacturers would give all the teams free sheet metal and, you know, free this and that. And, you know, Buick would like give money. Kenny Bernstein was only, Kenny Bernstein and Bobby Allison ran a Buick.
Okay.
There for a while.
So they gave money to Kenny.
They gave money and sheet metal and, you know, engine blocks, cylinder heads, you know, manifolds, things that NASCAR required, you know, NASCAR spec parts.
Right.
And back then you had to use stock sheet metal.
Okay.
So people like Cecil Tippett, he'd get creative. Now your roof and trunk, lid and hood, that was all spec. The rest was all sheet metal. So that's where they got creative. You know, you tried to maneuver the bodywork to fit that template to your advantage.
Okay.
And it was quite interesting watching that happen, you know. So there was tolerances that you could work with. They let you get away with. Engine-wise, it was pretty tough. In the early days, they really didn't have templates.
Okay.
You know, that's why I was doing things that I'm not even going to talk about because you were forced to. I went through tech. Harry Gant won 3 or 4 races in a row, and we ran second at Wilkesboro. And, you know, we had to pull the heads, normal drill there, and they checked the bore, and they checked the heads and the manifold. And I looked at his intake port. It was a half inch higher than ours. You know, we were legal. And I said, Mr. Beatty, who was in charge, look at those ports. Can I do that? Absolutely not. We're going to be doing something in the future. I went to the next race. We finished second or third again.
Yeah.
Saw the same thing, you know, no templates, no nothing. And so I went to Brodex, and they couldn't give me a cheated up head. I said, give me a dash 12 head. We were on the 867 Pontiac. I said, I just want a dash 12 pair of heads. I went there. I had already been there in the 70s.
Yeah.
And with Larry Phillips, famous dirt late model racer, I did his engines, billet, aluminum block, you know, dirt late model engines back in the late 70s, early 80s. But he took me, I did a summer tour with him, and he took me to Brodex. I met JV Brotherton, the owner, and
Okay.
it was pretty cool. But of course, back then, all I had to work with was the Dash 8 head, which was, you know, a fairly small head in today's world.
Okay.
So I had to import every one of them. That same head I used for IndyCar when I built the Chevys, because that's all we had. But back to the, I hate to say the word, but you were forced to do it, the cheating. You know, I told you I made 660 horsepower, I think I told you.
Yep.
And that was really, really good. but that was the qualifier. You know, the race engines weren't that much, as 640.
Yep.
So the Pontiac, there was a Pontiac Arrowhead, and then there was the part number that was on the head, and so what I had to do was hand engrave the Pontiac Arrowhead. Had to weld a pad on it first, and then smooth that down, and then hand engrave the Pontiac Arrowheads on the head, and the tiny little part number, which was pretty long. I had to hand engrave that, and then of course hand port the heads, and then I had to. That wasn't hard enough. I had to just. This thing was a high port, monster.
Yep.
Well, no manifold would fit it, and there were only certain manifolds that were legal for NASCAR. So I took the Holly manifold. It was the best one that I could disguise, and I can't remember everything I did. It was so involved. But and then you have to shot peen everything, so you can't tell. And then made over 670 after all that work.
Wow.
Made over 670, and it ran really good. But we won North Wilkesboro with Brett Bodine. We were on the pole at Charlotte with Brett Bodine. Ricky Rudd was there the first year I was there. I got there late because I did Indy. I did the Indy first, and then I moved to. It was a challenge back then because you always had to be thinking of how to keep up with the other guy. Because NASCAR, basically, what they would do, the guy would have you when I used to go to the racetrack, pull the carburetor, and then he had this valve on a chain that was machined to the diameter of a no-go for your carburetor base plate, and he'd try to gouge it in there. That was his big deal, and then they would pump your engine, check you for cubic inches. There were no compression rules, and then everything else was just visual. Just visual. They would check when you would pull your heads. They would check your bore with an inside mic. An inside mic, just straight across, and that's how they checked your bore. No
dial indicator,
and they put a micrometer on it. And I remember one time, you were allowed 358 cubic inch max.
Yep.
And I was 357. I knew where I was at. And this is a funny story. I was 357.4 cubic inches according to them.
Okay.
And he said, "Don't you ever bring this engine back. Don't you dare. It's too close." That was Wilkesboro or Martinsville. I forgot which one. And what did I do? We made sure we rebuilt that engine and took the same engine back to the next race. It was the next weekend. And I just was determined, and lo and behold, we got tore down again. Measured it, didn't say a word. But after he said that, I said, I'm legal. I did the minimum hone on the block, and I was just determined to just, you want to play that game, I'll play it back. I'm legal, you and your inside mic. golly.
I've seen spacer restrictor plates that have a slide in them that they can slide out, I think, and make there's no restrictor. And then when it came time for inspection, they push it back in. It would slide back into the right restrictor.
Yeah, and I told you last time about the big deal was they would lift against the restrictor plate and be worth 12 horsepower. Yeah, or so.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a big deal that a lot of people did. And then, last story I told you they got caught. And I didn't tell you, NASCAR didn't put them to the back, which they should have, because the legal guys were fast and they were slow. And there was a wreck started that Daytona 500 because of NASCAR.
Because the slow guy was in the front.
The slow guys were in the back.
Oh,
I mean, yeah, the slow guys were up front.
Yeah,
but they qualified fast because they were cheating.
Right.
And they got busted. And that should be a lesson in NASCAR. If somebody, you'd never let them keep their spot. They don't today, I don't believe. But there's hardly any cheating today. It's so tight and so specced out. I mean, they're not making any horsepower. I mean, 550, 650. That's it.
Wow.
That's less than we were making in 1989, 90 that they run today. It's sad.
What was the peak stuff? 750, 800? What were they making back in the best with like Yates heads? What were
900?
900. Okay.
Yeah. The D3 will make 900.
What about the C3 stuff?
C3, when we first started doing them, they were 700.
Okay.
And that was flat tappet cam.
Yep.
And
flat top piston.
Yeah, it got better as we went along, but that was still good, for back in those days, where the Chevy still had the Chevy could run the 18 degree, and I forgot what they were making.
What's that, SB2?
What was that?
SB2, is that 18 degree? No,
SB2 is around 10.5 by 3.5.
Okay.
Intake, and 8 around 8 by 0 on the exhaust. Don't hold me to that exactly. I should know it, but do too many different types of heads to remember everything.
What were they making? An SB2 motor, roughly.
I never asked Rick Mann.
Okay.
Never asked. See, in my world of doing heads for all these different engine builders, that's one thing I would not ask: how much horsepower you're making. And the reason for that is, I don't want them to think that I'll tell another engine builder what they're making.
Okay.
So the least I know, the better off I am. And then I can never get accused of anything, or, and not that I would do it, but, then I don't have to worry about it. But a dirt late model engine today makes 900, but they make, around 700 pound-feet of torque, which is, whew.
Oh, yeah.
It's
crazy.
The our 9-degree billet Ford on Australian Pro Stock, 400 cubic inches, made 1187 and 670 on torque.
Wow.
That's it's almost 3 horse per cube. Naturally aspirated gasoline. That's with 2 Braswell 2.250
Dominators.
Special. Well, his version.
Yep.
Of his own version.
Sure.
Yeah, I worked with him a lot on that kind of stuff. And yeah, are there any questions you got on the C3? Because there's a lot more we could talk about.
Like, how secret was it? I mean, when we talk about it, it's like there's some things you told me we don't talk about. How secret was it when you were there? I mean, if you're doing heads for everybody else, you don't want you don't want the other guys to know that you're doing this guy's heads. No one really know who's doing what, correct?
Right. I never went to the race fair. I never went to a NASCAR race because, I'd be talking to different engine builders, and you just can't do that.
I mean, you don't want anyone to know whose heads you're doing. It's secret.
It's just, it's a, what's the right word? Paranoid world.
Yeah.
And that kind of competition. And, if we'll get into a story about Jack Rouse in a little bit, but if we have time.
Okay.
But let's say Robert saw me talking to Jack and vice versa, and it's just not good business, and so that's why I just didn't want to take a chance. I'd go to the ARCA races with Joe Ryan. I got to be on the podium in Charlotte. They invited me up because Frank won, and that was fun. And I've been there in NASCAR back when I worked for Kenny Bernstein, but on the pole at Charlotte, that was a big deal. A little funny story about that. When you're on the pole, you're subject to a serious teardown before the race, and so they kept asking me, and the crew chief kept asking me, when are you going to get that engine tore down? Oh, don't worry about it. And I kind of waited till the last minute just to keep everybody on the edge. I said, don't worry, that engine's legal. And then I went through the drill. It's just, you're so busy with other things because you got to get the race engine in and, get all that going. And then they check you, they look things over pretty good.
Okay.
It's just that they didn't. And those heads that we were on the pole at Charlotte, that's the very first set of heads I did for Kenny. Made 660 right out of the bat. And I told you I'd never seen that head before, that 867 Pontiac, and I just went in there and started grinding.
Wow.
It's just, it's so much I call it hand-eye coordination.
Okay.
Because you got to make every port the same, and you don't have time to, every little bit you grind to go in there and measure. That's why it's so much visual, and your hand, and having the right carbide in your hand. It's picking the right tooling, and knowing how to keep things square and not bumpy. That's the trick of the trade, which we could get into. I could teach people some tricks there someday.
Just in grinding.
Talk about grinding. What?
Just in grinding. I was looking at my Dotco. I have a Dotco. That's what I was using yesterday to port an intake manifold. What do you use for grinders?
Yeah, I use Dotco. That's all I'll use. Yeah, just Dotco only. They're very expensive, but I've got 30-year-old Dotcos that are still running. You can buy bearing kits for them. That's the only thing they'll wear out in a Dotco is the bearing.
Really?
You just got to lube it every time you use it.
Nice.
And they're the best. Back when I bought them, they were $400 a piece. Now you probably paid $600.
Yeah, for that, and that's not even the top of the line.
Yeah,
it's only like a 1/4 inch. Wow.
Yeah, I've got some 1/4 inch ones. When I'm hogging,
Yep.
I've got 1/4 inch shank real wide staggered tooth carbides, and I tell you, you better hang on or it'll break your wrist. You know, if you get into a corner and you don't have the right grip,
Yep.
and it'll just grab, and you better be ready for it, or it'll hurt you. Yeah.
When you did stuff by hand, I mean, you would sit there and hand port a set of heads. How long did you work on a set before you had to take a break for your hands killing you?
Oh, I could do it all day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, 8-10 hours a day. Yeah, I didn't. Well, when you're young and stupid, you know,
Yeah.
you just and you got to get it done. I mean, back when I built engines, you know, I couldn't build the engine without a ported set of heads, and I had to do it myself. I mean, there weren't really people you could call to get heads ported.
Okay.
You know, back, you know, I told you even the Indy Chevys I built, I had to port those heads. So yeah, that's how you had to do it. You know, the sprint car engines and all that stuff. I'm sure there were head porters out there. I know Joe Mondello. You know, he started out. He's a great head porter. He had employees, but you know, he did a beautiful iron head. You know, back in the day. I never really saw any of his aluminum stuff. I remember the first NASCAR head I did way back in 70s, 80s era. That was that bow tie Chevy type head.
Okay.
That was the hardest thing. You know, they were so hard. It was like another hard head is a Mopar, like a Hemi head or any of those Mopar iron heads.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, they'll wear you out.
Oh man.
And you could, and I used stones back then, and because carbides, back in those days, a carbide, it would just get hot instantly. You'd always be dipping it to cool it.
Okay.
You know, and stones worked actually fairly good. I ported a lot of heads with stones, get the right grit and grade, and iron heads, not aluminum, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not aluminum, but yeah. So yeah, we could talk more about C3 or D3 or anything you want, because
I'm looking at the time. We're almost at 2 hours.
Pretty quick on all the way up to the 9-degree billet.
We're already at almost 2 hours, Don.
Oh, we are. Yeah. Oh yeah, we are already 2 hours. Yeah, yeah. It's 5 till.
Have you ever thought about teaching any kind of thing, like teaching like the basics of porting, like a class or something?
I've been thinking about it more. You know,
Mondello used to do it. Joe Mondello had a course you could take and whatever, and go there and port heads at one time. And but I don't know of anybody that does an actual hands-on seminar. You know, not even learn how to port the head, but just how to hold a grinder, what bits to use for what burrs for what. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an art, and yeah, I have been thinking about that more and more. When you can't have too many people,
right?
You know,
5 or 10 at the most.
Cheated.
Okay.
You know, they wouldn't learn properly because you don't have time to go around. So yeah, you know, if anybody's interested, they could reach out to you or get a hold of me.
We can just do like a five guys show up and they just do a quick little 3 or 4 hour seminar on it, get the basics.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Well, yeah, it would
be more than 3 hours with you.
It would. Yeah, that's the problem, because you're just not going to get it right away.
Yep.
Because it's so hard to you know, you have to teach them how to make templates. How do you go around a push rod turn? You know, you really need, if you want to be perfect, you make a template. If you're hand grinding a head,
Okay.
And you know, you got to understand how to measure, and some of these people won't even know how to read a micrometer, let alone a pair of dial calipers, or you know, an inside, you know, spring
snap gauge,
or anything. You know, you may have to start from scratch. There's just so much to learn, and then teaching them. I'll give you a little tip.
Yep.
Well, no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to. That'll come for another story.
Okay.
It's too. That could be another show we could do.
We could just do it on stories of people that you've met, personal stories, tidbits.
Yeah.
That's what we should do.
We need to talk about Jack Roush.
Yep.
You know, and you know, get into Smokey Yunick and Robert Yates and Doug Yates, and you know, because I've been able to spend time and get to know all of them. You know, Jack mainly that 2-hour visit at our shop, and then you know, doing heads for him, and then we could get into more about Bob Riffle and us picking up Roush 10 horsepower.
Okay.
And I'll throw a quick one out there. We got a little bit of time.
Okay.
I don't know if I told it last time, but it's something that Jack, he wanted all his 4-car team, everybody to have the same engine. And that engine went into Ted Musgrave's car for Michigan, and it had been about 95, 6 era, right in there.
Yep.
And he, you know, that thing really ran. You know, 10 horsepower in NASCAR, it's like, you know, forget about it.
No,
it doesn't happen. And then Mark Martin, he thought, what in the world's going on here? You know, that guy, he's gone, you know, and, you know, naturally Jack heard about it, because that's something Jack didn't do. And so that's when he really wanted me to, you know, get heads done as soon as possible so they could get engines done.
Right.
And Mark Martin, I don't know if anybody remembers. Remember when he won 4 in a row? It was, I forgot. It was right in that era.
Okay.
It was 3 or 4 in a row. That was all Ultra Pro's heads.
Nice.
So I'm pretty proud of that. And yeah, we can talk more about, you know, my visit with Junior, and
yeah.
It was an honor doing heads for Jasper engines. You know, they had, that's another Ford we did. It was kind of funny. I remember one day, this was scary. I had heads done for Jack Roush, Jasper, and Penske on Nob Hill Lane in Mooresville, North Carolina. Their shops were right in a row. I'm thinking, how am I going to pull this off? And somehow I was able to deliver a set of heads to each team. That's kind of it was. I was scared actually when I was doing it. I'm thinking, man, you know, I don't want, because I always tried to keep everything private, and
right.
They didn't know. No, one didn't know I was doing for the other. I never brought it up, and you know, I never went to the racetrack, so they never knew anything. But that was kind of. I was actually nervous doing that. I don't get nervous, you know, as an engine builder looking at an engine run on the dyno, or you know, or at the racetrack. That never bothered me, but that did. Now, if you're an engine builder, you just put 1,000 pieces in an engine. and not one of them you made normally.
Right.
So you're relying on all these different vendors, and you're putting this engine out there, and you're watching it go around the racetrack, but you can't even think about it. You know, you just enjoy the moment of it running, and that's the way I always looked at it. If you look at or think about what if, I mean, you'll never make it as an engine builder or, you know, or a machinist.
Sure.
Or you can't what if anything. You just got to get in there and
Do it.
And do your job, and you know, put it out there, and be proud of it, and you always do the best work you can. And I think I told you last time, I wouldn't start an engine assembly unless I had everything ready. I mean, everything would be on my bench, laid out in a certain order. I did it. My ring end gap was done. My bearing clearance was done. I knew my end plays, you know, from pre-assembly. And you can assemble an engine in no time. I remember there was a race team I was building a sprint car engine for, and it wasn't assembled, and it was race day, and it was all apart. And they were, you know, we didn't have a dyno back then.
Okay.
We're not going to make it to the racetrack. And I said, don't worry. And, you know, in about 3 hours, they had their fully assembled, well, it was 4 hours. They had their fully assembled sprint car engine, you know, degreed cam, everything timed. Here you go, boys. You know, valves adjusted, ready to go. Okay.
Dang it, man.
It's just, but if I wouldn't have had my act together, it never would have happened. That's why, you know, you just can't do things unless you're ready to actually do them. You got to be prepared.
Nope, I get it.
And, you know, I knew everything was ready. Everything was clean. You know, I had the rods on the pistons, you know, with the circlips in them and all that, the spiral locks back in those days. And the Cosworth piston was a little round clip. We used some of those. They started in the V8 world back then, in about 1980. Yeah, golly, we hit over 2 hours now.
There it is. So we're going to call it an end. And here's what we're going to do, guys. Everybody's like saying all kinds of great things, and I'd love to hear it. You know, Bill Ferretti was saying how Don should downshift via lectures and seminars. That's pretty cool, because what you're talking about is things that you don't read in a book. You can't read it in a book. It's hands-on only. So we can start next week, or whenever we decided to do the next chat. Let's just stick with history and stories of all the guys. I've been writing everything down, Don. So we'll just talk. We won't talk about parts for the most part. We'll throw in the line that you make towards the end of our next talk, you know, about the oil sprayer stuff, about the billet valve covers, about the carb spacers, all that stuff. We'll put that towards the end. But let's just plan on doing one where we talk about just, you know, some experiences you've had with Robert Yates, you know, stuff with Roush, just different people, racers that you know that interacted with, just stuff that we can share. Are you in?
Yeah, that'd be fun because I've talked to Zora Duntov. I mean,
I remember you said that.
You talk about a legend, you know, and
smoking, you know,
and Sig. Well, excuse me.
Yeah.
Ed Escuderian. I've talked to him.
Yeah.
Grumpy Jenkins. I've talked to him. You know, in person. We're talking in person.
Oh, yeah, that's what we want to talk about.
Dale Ike, you know, people, they're legends. And I'm, you know, they're Ed Pink. You know, I consider him a friend.
Oh, yeah.
We did business so long. I mean, what a great man. Ed is just amazing. and I know his son Bill. He's local here, and yeah, there's a lot of people. Larry Wallace and I have talked.
Oh yeah.
I've been around Roger Penske. I've talked to AJ Foyt. I did their heads.
Okay.
And I don't know if I told you the story about AJ Foyt, but yeah, we need to get into that.
I got it down. I'll put it down as a note.
It was an honor doing work for him because I raced against him. And I talked to him in person at Charlotte Motor Speedway. That'd be a fun show.
Okay.
And we could, I could just reminisce, just to let everybody know these last 2-hour deals we've done, that's all from memory. That's no notes, no nothing. I didn't look at one note. It's just from memory, and there's a lot more we could talk about the C3 and the D3 and different, port designs and what you're looking for, and we need to get into rocker geometry, which is critical. How to go about that as an engine builder.
Oh yeah.
And there's two different philosophies, and the way TD does it and the way Jessel does it, and both, work. And it's all about the engine builder as to what he wants and who he likes the best. So there's just so many things that I've been through as an engine builder, head porter, CNC machinist, regular machinist, manual machinist, and flow bench operator.
The list goes on.
How many hours? I've had my first Superflow 600 in the mid '80s. When they first came out.
Yep.
And I'll tell you a quick story.
Okay.
That is a little funny. Back in those days, we floated 25 inches of water.
Yep.
I mean that because the flow, most people had Superflow 110s.
Okay.
They barely blow and suck air. But it was 25 inches back then, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing these high flow numbers. I'm thinking, man, and I was on the flow bench just working my butt off on a sprint car head. Man, how in the world are they getting that? Then I find out everybody switched to 28 inches. Oh man, and so I mean that just shows you how one little change can just upset your whole
apple cart.
Your deal. Like you think you're out in left field, that you're not. You're
right.
Fighting, and you're on the flow bench for hours and trying this and that. Man, how in the world? And then I could tell you some stories about valve seat profiles. Marty Zimmerman used to work for me, and then he worked for Ray Evernham on the Dodges. He was the head of the cylinder head department, and they had an epoch there and everything. And he knew that I had some good cutters, and asked me if he could buy one, and he used it, and picked them up power. One little change, and you're talking about engineers galore, at Evernham, and very, very smart people, and one little boom like that, an intake seat profile, 5 horsepower, like what? So it's just, you've got to look at everything as an engine builder. Every little area of the port.
Oh yeah.
You know, the seat, the combustion chamber, intake exit into the chamber, exhaust entrance, you know, from the chamber into the, everything is just one little change here and there. I don't know how much more time you want to spend, but we'll get in. Just remind me about
I'm writing it down.
valve jobs
Yep.
and Rouse Yates. Valve jobs and Rouse Yates.
Got it.
On the next one, and I'll tell you a really interesting story. Otherwise, we're going to, you know, people just won't have time to listen.
Nope. We got it. We're going to cut it there.
I mean, I could go on and on of all the, you know, shoot, look at all the years I've been doing this.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm kind of rare that I'm engine builder, head porter, manifold. I've ground manifolds, you know, and, you know, that we could probably get into, we should have spent time on when we were doing the C3 is the way I bathtub that intake manifold out.
I'll put a note. Yep.
Yeah, that'd be interesting because, I mean, if you looked at that thing, it looked like, I mean, it was just a monster. You'd never think about running a plenum like that. Out, you know, 30 degrees in the front and 30 in the rear, and just, you know, flat floor going into the ports, and it's just crazy. But Ford cast the manifold for us so we could do it, and that's what made the Ford run it in a plate version.
Yep.
And then remind me, I'll tell you a story. I don't think I told it last time. Maybe I did, about my name got put on a manifold.
Nope, you haven't said
that. And it was cheated up.
Okay.
And I didn't do it. The guts they put in it. I quit doing the insides. I just did the manifolds.
Okay.
You know, and what they put on the inside was up to the teams. Everybody did something different, but I don't remember if I talked about that last time.
No, I don't remember that.
I don't think I did, but boy, oh boy, that was not good. Not good. I never put my name on a manifold, and they put my name on the manifold, Ultra Pro Machining.
Yep.
And cheated it up, and got caught.
Well, it's in the list. It's going to be, this will be good, you know.
Yeah.
Not as technical, but some of it will be.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
and I'm liking it.
And all of a sudden, I'm getting calls from, you know, people I know. Hey, you're famous. Your manifold's at the big red truck on display. Oh gosh! And I didn't do anything wrong. I gave away a bit of the story, but I'll get into more details.
Okay.
Next time. That's what you go through.
Well, this is the stuff the guys here, you know, the guys that we've had basically an average of 60 guys here. So I guarantee within a week, we'll have probably close to 2,000 views, you know, because not everybody can take this time. And that's why it's on a replay for you guys to be able to, at your own leisure. You don't have to sit here and look at me. You put it on in your shop while you're working on something, and you can just listen along. And that's like, you know, that's a podcast. So that makes it nice. So.
Yeah, because the first one's up to 1,300 views.
Yep.
The one we did last Saturday night. And yeah.
And I've got a lot of subscribers.
People. I didn't have a chance. I worked all day today. I'm kind of exhausted. I worked all day today, and I didn't have time to like text anybody to let them know.
Well, the next time that we do it, we'll do it. I even did this one about 3 days ahead of time. We'll even do it, you know, a week ahead of time or whatever. So we got plenty of time to get it out there.
And then they can, from the same, whatever you call it, they can see both of them, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay.
All right, guys.
Enjoyed it.
So listen, make sure that you come back for the next time Don Losito and I talk, because it's going to be story time at DragBoss Garage. I appreciate you guys being here. Make sure you give the thumbs up, like, and subscribe, guys. I appreciate the live chats and the super chats that you guys contributed. Thank you so much, Lumbee Warrior. I appreciate that. And also you, John Salvatera. So thanks, guys. Stay tuned to DragBoss Garage, where you never know what you're going to see or learn, because it's always new.